People called Lou Macari a legend, a warrior, a man who gave everything to the game, and on the surface, that is exactly what he looked like. But his ex-wife just pulled back the curtain, and what she revealed in those 15 minutes told a very different story. Because Lou Macari was an addict, not in the way you might think. His drug was not a powder or a pill. It was something far more dangerous and far more acceptable. And if this kind of raw, unfiltered football story is what you want to see more of, use the hype feature right now and give this video some hype so more people get the chance to watch it. His addiction was control, money, winning, work. It was a hunger that never switched off. Not at the training ground, not in the courtroom, not even at home when his family needed him most. Lou Macari turned 76 in February 2026, and the revelations that came with that milestone have forced Britain to look again at a man who thought he had it all figured out. What the research shows is a lifetime of obsession that left a trail of courtroom battles, shattered trust, and heartbreak that no trophy could ever fix. We are going to walk through it all, the scandals, the lawsuits, the family tragedy that broke him wide open, and finally, the one thing he did that might actually matter. Before any of that though, you need to understand where this obsession came from. Because Lou Macari did not wake up one morning and decide to put football above everything else. It was baked into him from boyhood. He was born in Edinburgh in 1949. His father worked in catering after the family relocated from Newton Grange to London. Then his father died. Early. Too early. And just like that, young Lou became the man of the house. He was the only child. His mother had no one else. That weight landed on him before he was even old enough to carry it properly. He did not grieve like a child. He did not have that luxury. He pivoted. He focused. He locked his eyes on one goal and one goal only: money, security, a future where no one he loved would suffer because the household ran short. That kind of early loss does something to a person. It carves a groove in the brain, a groove that says, work harder, earn more, never stop, never let your guard down. For some people, that groove leads somewhere good. For Lou Macari, it led to the pitch. And for a long time, it looked like it was working beautifully. At Celtic, he became part of something remarkable. The club had a reserve group called the Quality Street Gang. Do not let the sweet name fool you. This was one of the most talented collections of young footballers Scotland had ever produced. Kenny Dalglish was in there, Danny McGrain too. But while his teammates focused on the romance of the hoops, Macari was doing cold calculations in his head. He was thinking about his mother. He was thinking about stability. He was thinking about what football could give him beyond applause. That thinking drove him south in 1973. Manchester United came calling and offered a fee of £200,000. Serious money. It reflected his value, but also his willingness to leave the emotional comfort of Celtic behind if the numbers made sense. And for Macari, the numbers always won. Old Trafford was not Parkhead, but it paid. And that was what his scarcity mindset demanded above all else. He played well at United. He was respected, a proper footballer by any measure. But even as a player, the obsession was humming underneath. And when he moved into management, that obsession grew louder. His move to Swindon Town in 1984 as player manager is where the Lou Macari story starts to get complicated. Because on the surface, it looked like another triumph. The man arrived and got to work. He banned alcohol in and around the club. He put in a rigorous fitness program. Players who had been coasting were suddenly running until their lungs burned. The results followed. 4th Division champions in 1986. 3rd Division playoff winners in 1987. That is a serious record. That is a manager who knows exactly what he is doing. But here is the problem with obsession. It does not know when to stop. It does not know the line between discipline and something darker. And in 1989, the line got crossed in a way that shocked English football. It came out that Macari had placed a bet on Swindon to lose an FA Cup tie against Newcastle United, his own club. He called it an insurance bet. He said it was a practical measure to cover the financial costs the club might face in the event of a defeat. The Football Association did not see the pragmatism in it. They fined him £1,000. And the word that attached itself to Macari after that was not pragmatic, it was suspicious. It was unethical. It was the kind of word that follows a man from room to room and never quite leaves. He resigned from West Ham United not long after, only a few months into the job. The betting story had poisoned the air around him, and he knew it. The man who prided himself on discipline and results had become the manager who bet against his own side. Call it what you like. Call it financial pragmatism. Call it an insurance policy. It looked rotten. And reputation once cracked does not simply mend itself overnight. What came next was worse. In 1992, Lou Macari stood in the dock at Winchester Crown Court. The charge was tax fraud. He was accused of conspiring to cheat the Inland Revenue by being part of a system that made undeclared payments to players. The prosecution described him as one of the architects of a scheme that diverted gate receipts and sponsorship income into illegal cash top-ups. 5 weeks that trial lasted. 5 weeks of sitting there while barristers painted a picture of a man who had bent the rules for financial gain. His co-defendants included Chairman Brian Hillier and an accountant named Vince Farrar. Hillier was found guilty and sent to prison. Macari was not. The jury returned a not guilty verdict in July 1992. He walked out of that courtroom a free man. He walked out in tears, not because he was relieved, well, partly because he was relieved, but mainly because of what the trial had exposed about the people around him. He felt disowned, betrayed by colleagues at Swindon who had left him exposed in ways that were deeply unfair. The tough one, the disciplinarian, the provider, standing outside a Crown Court with tears on his face. That image tells you something. Underneath the obsession, there was a human being who had never learned how to process collapse. His entire model for survival was built on forward momentum. When you are forced to stand still in a courtroom for 5 weeks, that model breaks down. And yet, rather than stepping back and reflecting, Macari kept pushing. That groove in the brain never switched off. In October 1993, Celtic came calling again, a return to the club where he had made his name. On paper, a homecoming. In reality, it became what Macari himself would later describe as a disaster. The club was mid-takeover by a businessman named Fergus McCann. McCann wanted to modernise Celtic's structures and had very specific ideas about what a manager owed the club. One of those obligations was written into Macari's contract in black and white, the residency clause. Macari was required to live within 45 miles of Celtic Park. His home was in Stoke-on-Trent, that is considerably more than 45 miles from Glasgow. Macari's argument was simple. He was committed to the team's results. He was focused on performance. Where he put his head down at night should not matter. McCann did not agree, not even slightly. He viewed the absences as outrageous, as a manager who was simply not present enough for the job he was being paid to do. The disagreement spiraled. Macari was dismissed in June 1994. And here is where the stubbornness that had served him so well on the pitch became genuinely self-destructive. He took Celtic to court. He wanted compensation. He was claiming £345,000. He was certain he was right. He was certain that McCann had acted in bad faith and that the law would see it his way. The Court of Session saw it very differently. The judges ruled in favour of Celtic. Not just by a narrow margin, the appeal was rejected 3-0, unanimously. The ruling stated in no uncertain terms that Macari's breach of contract was no technicality. McCann had every right to expect his manager present at the club daily. Macari had not been present. End of argument. He did not get the £345,000. Instead, he walked away with a legal bill estimated at £500,000. £500,000 gone. The man who had dedicated his life to building financial security for himself and his family had thrown away a fortune in a courtroom fight built on pride and the refusal to admit he was wrong. This was the addiction at its most destructive. Not a substance, not a vice that strangers could see and judge, just a man so consumed by the need to win, so unable to accept defeat, that he kept fighting long after any rational person would have stopped and walked away. The obsession cost him everything it had taken him decades to earn. And then April 1999 arrived, and every courtroom loss, every scandal, every fine, every pound spent on legal battles became completely irrelevant in an instant. Jonathan Macari was 19 years old. He had followed his father into professional football and was on the books at Nottingham Forest. Then Forest released him. They paid him off. A £10,000 payoff. For a 19-year-old who had grown up watching his father equate money with security, that money came at the worst possible moment. Because Jonathan was not equipped to handle the sudden loss of a professional identity. He had no framework for what to do when football disappeared, and it turned out he had been struggling in ways that nobody close to him had known. After Jonathan took his own life, the truth about his final months emerged. He had been using drugs, cocaine, ecstasy. He was in significant debt to local drug dealers in the Stoke area. For Lou Macari, a man who had banned alcohol at Swindon with an iron fist, a man who had built his entire identity around discipline and control and providing for those he loved, this was a devastation beyond description. His own son, his own flesh and blood, had been living a hidden life of addiction and debt while Lou was somewhere else, focused on the next fight, the next court case, the next argument to win. He initially found it almost impossible to believe that drugs had been involved, but he came to acknowledge the truth. He came to see the terrible parallel between Jonathan's lump sum payout and the addiction spiral that followed. He understood, too late, how the pressure placed on young athletes and the absence of proper emotional support had contributed to a catastrophe he could never undo. If you or someone you know is carrying something heavy right now, please reach out to someone you trust. That step costs nothing, and it can change everything. The 15-minute revelation that surfaced in early 2026 brought his ex-wife's perspective into the public eye. A podcast segment, widely discussed, centered on the minutes and hours surrounding the discovery of Jonathan's death, on the long-term impact that Macari's professional obsession had on the family's life together, on the cost of a man who was always somewhere else, always preparing, always competing, always driven by that groove carved into him before he was old enough to understand what it meant. The revelation did not excuse, it explained. It painted a fuller picture of a household shaped by a man whose idea of love was providing financially while being emotionally distant. That public reckoning in 2026 forced a harder question. If the greatest addiction in Lou Macari's life was the pursuit of control and money and winning, what did his family lose while he was chasing it? The answer, according to his ex-wife's perspective, was not comfortable, and it should not be. But here is where the story turns, because Lou Macari eventually asked himself the hardest question a person can ask. He asked, "What have I done?" After leaving football, he looked back at a life built inside stadiums and felt the weight of what had been left undone. Not trophies, not results, not courtroom battles, but real human connection, real presence. The kind of things money was never going to buy back. Out of that reckoning, in 2016, he created the Macari Centre in Stoke-on-Trent. This matters. Say what you want about the path that led him there. The path was littered with decisions that hurt people. But what he built in Stoke is real, and it is serious. Stoke-on-Trent has been hit hard. Industrial decline gutted the local economy years ago, and a drug called monkey dust has made the crisis worse. Monkey dust is terrifying. It induces bizarre and violent behavior, and it is addictive in ways that are hard to comprehend unless you have seen it up close. Lou Macari has seen it up close. Because he goes to the Macari Centre nearly every day, he is not a patron who attends the annual dinner and sends a check. He is on the front line, providing shelter, food, and basic human dignity for people who have nothing. The numbers are meaningful. The centre started with 18 residents. It now has capacity for 48. The centre is growing. It is evolving. It is doing real work for real people in a city that desperately needs it. Macari has spoken about a resident named Stephen, a man who received a lump sum of benefit payments and died shortly afterwards. The echo of Jonathan is unmistakable. That is why Macari keeps showing up. That is why the centre is not just a charity to him, it is atonement. The work he could not do when his son needed him most, now redirected toward the Stephens of Stoke who still have a chance. His story does not have a clean moral. That would be too easy and too dishonest. The truth is that Lou Macari spent most of his life feeding an obsession that served him in some ways and damaged nearly everything around him in others. The betting controversy, the tax fraud trial, the £500,000 Celtic disaster. These were not the actions of a villain. They were the actions of a man who never learned to stop chasing, even when stopping was the only sensible thing to do. His biggest addiction was never a substance. It was the relentless, desperate, all-consuming need to win, to provide, to control, to never be that boy who lost his father too early and was left holding the weight of everything. At 76, he is still showing up, every day. In a shelter in Stoke-on-Trent, surrounded by people who know what it means to hit rock bottom. And in that work, there is something genuine, something that the courtrooms and training grounds never gave him, something that looks, at last, like peace. If you made it this far, you already know this channel is worth your time. Hit the like button, subscribe so you never miss the next one, and drop a comment below telling us what you think of Lou Macari's story. Was it redemption, or was it too little too late? We want to know.